Hello and welcome to The Leading Question. I'm your host, Steve Wigrizer. In each edition of The Leading Question, we're going to bring you interesting and significant people who make a difference in their communities, with an emphasis on the law. Today's guest is David Kwass. Mr. Kwass is a partner in the law firm of Saltz, Mongeluzzi, and Bendesky. He has a fascinating legal practice that we're going to talk about today. And David, welcome to The Leading Question.
Steve, thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. Tell our viewers exactly what you do for a living.
What I do primarily is to represent construction workers and their families in connection with cases in which there have been catastrophic construction accidents. It is unfortunately very, very frequent that I never meet my clients. I meet their families after a worker has been killed. Typically, I'm involved with cases in which a worker has fallen from height, or a piece of equipment has tipped over, or a piece of equipment has hit overhead power lines. Those are the primary areas in which I'm working. Got some secondary areas, but that's the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes, the thing that I'm engaged in every single day of every week.
And how did you get into that field?
I was on the other side. I began at Duane Morris. I was primarily representing doctors and hospitals in medical malpractice cases. I did that for almost 9 years and had a number of cases with a former founding partner here, Steve Saltz, and one of the former partners here, Michael Barrett. And we had quite a few cases back in the day, and I was also in the same building. That was at a time at which Saltz Mongeluzzi was located on the 34th floor. So I would be in the elevator bank, and there was a guy who looked a little bit like me in those days and seemed as though he was about my age and was outgoing and friendly. And we would talk from time to time, and I learned that his name was Larry Bendesky, who's now our partner. And then there was this other guy who would typically be leaned back against the wall of the elevator. Maybe was not quite so forthcoming and friendly, but I learned that was Bob Mongeluzzi. And there was a point at which, about 9 years into being a medical malpractice defense lawyer, that Michael Barrett called me up and said, "Hey, listen, we're changing our firm. Mongeluzzi would be interested in speaking with you. Would you have any interest in talking with him and perhaps coming to the plaintiff's side?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely. I'm ready to come down and visit with you now." So I met with Mongo, I met with Larry. I knew immediately that it was an opportunity that I wanted to be involved with. So I think, I don't even remember what I was offered, but I pretty much said yes on the spot.
And the rest is history.
The rest in that way is history. And then on my first day here, which I think was in May of 1999, so it goes back a few years, Mongo called me into his office and he said, "Do you know what a scissor lift is?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, here are 2 scissor lift cases. Go do them." And that's literally how it started.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you bring that up because you alluded to a couple different types of cases, falls from height and other accidents on job sites. But you alluded to cases involving products or machines. And I'd like our viewers to understand what the concept of products liability means, and then a little bit about how that intersects with the work site, the construction sites.
Fundamentally, on any product that is in the workplace, there will be various types of safeties that are built in. The fundamental concept, Steve, is that if a piece of machinery, if a piece of equipment fails, it should not fail catastrophically, it should fail safely. So if we are talking about a mast climbing scaffold, which is a type of scaffolding where there will be one or two or more risers, and the work platform that the workers are in can travel up and down the side of the building on those risers. If there is a failure of one part of the mast climber, then what should happen is it catches. So is there a concerning fall for the workers in the platform? 6, 8, 12 inches? Yeah, but what you don't want is a catastrophic failure. What you don't want is a situation in which that platform, 6 stories above the ground, literally comes sliding all the way down the vertical mast risers, hitting the ground and killing workers. That's what we're trying to get away from. So when we're looking at machinery in the workplace, we are saying, okay, number one, are there safety features on the piece of machinery? Did those safety features work as intended? Should there have been other safety features which ought to have, in the event of something going awry, which ought to have protected a worker from being catastrophically injured or being killed? And are there types of hazards common to the workplace that the machinery can be designed in a way so as to prevent those hazards from becoming accidents?
Right, and you alluded to, and I'm referring to it as failing safe. I don't know if that's a concept that you use in your field.
Absolutely.
But you're talking about machinery and products in the work site, and I understand that that is the focus of your practice. But I think our viewers are also wondering, since on a daily basis we all interact with and have contact with machines and machinery of all kinds, certainly all kinds of power sources, electrical power, gas power, petroleum-based products on a regular basis. What protection is available for consumers when products don't fail safe, when products are dangerous and defective, separate and apart from the work site?
When we are talking about other sorts of products, very often we're talking about household products, very often we're talking about child products, we may be talking about recreational products. So other things that we use in non-work settings. And the key with products of that type is that they work in the way in which a reasonable person would anticipate that they would work. So I was involved in a case a number of years ago in which a family had been gifted at a baby shower a device that was intended to be used outside called a gel pot. And the idea was that it was decorative, it would give a warm glowing light. There was a particular way in which you would put in liquid fuel into a little canister and then light it. And it worked in a way that was unexpected. And this is what would happen. So you would have your beautiful ceramic or glass enclosure, and then it would be lit from inside. There would be a canister on the inside. You put in the gel fuel, and then there would be a lighting device that you would use, and at some point it would stop glowing. Right? You're outside for a couple of hours, you're enjoying friends, family, a barbecue, whatever it is you're doing, and then at some point it stops glowing. And so you think to yourself, hey, I'm going to put some more fuel into the gel pot in order to relight it and have another couple hours of this warm, beautiful glow. Here's the problem. You'd be looking in, you'd take your gel fuel, it would look to the naked eye as though the last canister of gel fuel was already out, it was no longer lit, only it was. So you put in the fuel and an explosion happens right in your face. So, and when gel fuel is lit and gets on human skin, it doesn't want to get off. It sticks and it burns, and it is absolutely horrific in the way that it can happen. So that's an example of a situation in which a product is performing in a way that's surprising to people. That's not what the average person looking at the product would expect. And in situations like that, that's where the civil justice system comes in, representing people who have been catastrophically burned by that sort of a product, and saying, no, that product is not well designed, well manufactured, it doesn't fail safely, it works in a way that is not expected by the average consumer, that's defective.
Well, you raise a very interesting issue. My understanding is that there are governmental agencies that concern themselves with consumer safety. For example, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Food and Drug Administration, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and I could probably list a number of other ones. If those agencies are doing their job, why do we need the civil justice system to step in?
The very, very short answer is really this. As a society, we can't rely on the Consumer Product Safety Commission. We can't rely on these government agencies to be solely responsible for keeping us safe, because they are reactive. They tend to have very, very close relationships, not with the consumer community, but with the manufacturing community. And they tend not to see as much of the problems with products as we do in the civil justice system on the front lines. So in fact, what will happen very often is it is our cases in which we're putting together the engineering, the evidence that a particular product has caused a particular harm in dozens of other cases. It's what we put together that often is a motivator for the federal agencies to begin an investigation, to actually look at perhaps making a manufacturer or an industry change the design or give additional warnings in connection with the product. So it really is the civil justice system. It really is lawyers like you, like me, like our partners, who are on a daily basis primarily involved in helping to keep products safe in our country. And they're simply, the federal agencies don't have the staffing, don't have the funding, and frankly, don't have the sophistication that we do in order to be able to analyze some of these product defect issues.
And is it true that lawyers like you have brought about changes in the way that products are manufactured or distributed, and with respect to warnings on those products?
So the answer is yes, and those are honestly some of our greatest accomplishments. Go back to a particular construction product. There is a type of motorized scaffolding, essentially, called a scissor lift. And the way in which the lift works is it has a base, it has 4 wheels, it drives forward and backward, it has a little bit of an ability to steer, and then, but its primary purpose is that the work platform itself, where workers are standing, goes from a travel height of 3, 4, 5 feet up, sometimes very, very high, upwards of 45, 50 feet. And one of the things that can happen when you are driving a motorized scaffolding, you're driving a scissor lift, and you are up 30, 40, 50 feet, is that it can be very, very difficult to see depressions, drain holes, divots, what have you, on the ground. And the problem is, if you drive a scissor lift into a drain hole, that lowering of one wheel will cause the entire scissor lift to tip over. And no good comes to a worker who's 30, 40, 50 feet up in the air when a scissor lift tips over. And there's no real safety advice that you can give once you're in that situation. That is a hazard that simply needs to be prevented in the first place. How do you prevent it? It is always a better thing, if possible, to build safety into the machine rather than exclusively relying on human beings to try to avoid a particular hazard. So, in this particular case, there is a product that was developed which basically at the base of the scissor lift would drop down bars running between the front wheels and the rear wheels like skis, which would reduce the ground clearance between the wheels, and this platform protector device, when a lift would go into a depression, would prevent the lift from tipping over. That's pothole protection, what we call it. So Bob Mongaluzzi and I, as well as a few other plaintiff lawyers around the country, were vigorously prosecuting scissor lift tip over cases around the country and advocating strongly and urging industry to adopt pothole protection device as being a standard feature of all scissor lifts. And we were finally successful in about 2001, when after that time, there was a lead-in period, but after that time, all scissor lifts were then required to come with a pothole protection device as standard equipment. There's another one that we just recently got, which involves an aerial lift called a boom lift. So there is a problem with boom lifts where a boom lift operator, this is another high reach piece of equipment, a boom lift operator is facing a control panel, but the boom lift operator is elevating in a way that is rearward. And last time I looked, I can double check the back of your head, most human beings don't come with a front set of eyes and a rear set of eyes. And on boom lifts, it's really kind of necessary. And what we have seen is, since the early 2000s, dozens and dozens of accidents in which a boom lift operator was focused on his controls in front of him and found himself pinned by an overhead joist against the control panel. And what can happen is, when that entrapment of an operator's torso occurs, that unintentionally the operator is continuing to actuate the lift, is continuing to cycle the lift, is continuing to make the lift want to go up and out. So the operator's own body is literally causing the machine to run in a way that traps him and crushes him, either to death or to a level of very, very serious injury. Bob Mongaluzzi and I handled and took to trial one of the, well, we think the very, very first boom lift operator entrapment case. And we proposed a design which would be a kind of a barrier guard so that an operator's torso could not come into contact with controls on the control panel that would actuate the lift in a way that continued running the worker into the joist, crushing him. The design that we came up with was mocked and ridiculed and criticized and all that stuff at the time of trial back in the mid-2000s. And eventually, all the major manufacturers around the world, not just in the US, around the world, came to market with a product based upon our design. And now, just in 2000, operator anti-entrapment devices became required under the new 2020 standards. So those are two examples of situations in which we have actually had a profound difference in helping to save lives. In the sorts of cases that I handle, it is not always necessarily the most important thing that I immediately speak to witnesses. These accidents can be so unexpected, witnesses can be so unreliable, that what I really want to be doing as much as possible from the beginning is following the physical evidence. So what I want to see is the machine that was involved, the space in which the machine was operating, and the marks, sorry to be graphic with you here, Steve, but the marks on the body of the injured or killed worker that are witness marks, that are telltale signs of where the worker may have interacted with the machine, how the worker interacted with the machine, or the area in which the worker was working. That's really the trinity of the investigation that I want to be performing very, very early on. So am I gathering records and listening to the opinions of OSHA, the police, safety inspectors, whomever else? Yeah, I'm listening. I have, 1 ear halfway on what they have to say. I don't trust anybody else to do my investigations. I don't trust anybody else to correlate what does the machine look like, what does the space in which the machine was working look like, what does the body of the victim look like. That is an analysis for which I have developed working relationships with very, very specialized experts, and in which I have enough experience that I often know a lot about what it is I am looking for. So to me, the single most critical part of an investigation, right, is what you and I call the preservation of evidence letter. I've got to write one when we finish today, right? As soon as an accident happens, I want to contact whoever is in control of a piece of machinery, of a particular vehicle, whatever the critical evidence may be, and I want to write, a letter on firm letterhead that says, hey, you better take good care of this piece of equipment, and by the way, I want to know when I can come see it.
And then you'll go out there, presumably either by yourself or with an expert, and you'll learn what you need to learn. The other thing that dawns on me in this day and age of security cameras,
that's great.
There's frequently evidentiary material available on film, but some of these security systems work on a continuous loop, and they don't preserve the film more than X number of hours or X number of days. How do you deal with that?
The biggest change in what we do is that when I started in the early 90s, it was extremely rare that there would be video of a particular accident or even video that was of the area or of the machinery that was close in time to when the accident occurred. That was something that was almost never a part of the cases. And you're absolutely right. Today, every construction site will have progress photos being taken, perhaps every 8 minutes or so. We get an amazing amount of information from that. And then every worker on a site has a Droid or an iPhone, and as soon as something looks or sounds off, everybody stops, all phones start taking video. So there is, and then you've got passersby who are looking in the construction fencing and what have you. There is an extraordinary amount of video evidence today on cases that simply wasn't a feature of when you and I started. Most of us seem to agree that when a catastrophic accident occurs, whether it's on the highway, in the workplace, at home, where have you, one of the very first things that you need to do is to call a lawyer. And that really is critically important, because every single minute that goes by without having your own lawyer involved is a minute during which others are making efforts to cover their butts and to cover their tracks. So that, to me, is an essential part of what one does. I think that there's a great deal more information about all of us in the online legal marketplace now. People are much more able to find an appropriate lawyer for a particular accident type using the internet, but it's also still okay to call the lawyer that the family has a relationship with and allow that lawyer to be involved in the process of helping to find the right lawyer. And that's also a key way in which some of these cases come to our attention.
What other types of cases are repetitive in your view?
We also see a great deal of other types of equipment tipping over. There's a particular type of a forklift that has a boom on it. So you've got like what looks like sort of a tractor, and then there's a long boom, and then the forklift mast is at the end of a boom. We call those telehandlers, or some people call them lulls. Those things will tip over. But I would say, Steve, maybe more than anything else, it is inadvertent contact with overhead power lines, right? So we see that with surveyors using surveying poles. We see that with concrete contractors, where they're smoothing out concrete using a bull float, and the handle extends rearward 14, 16, 18 feet and touches a power line. We see that with excavators that have their scallop buckets in the air, and we see that with all sorts of different types of cranes all the time. And electricity, when it is not contained on an overhead power line, electricity wants to go to ground. And if it can find a way to get from an overhead line to go through conductors to go into the ground, it's going to do it. And when that does it, if there is a person in the line of conductors between the high voltage line and the ground, then that person is going to be electrically shocked and burned and may well die. And we see that all the time.
Perspective on 30 plus years of doing this. Are our workplaces safer today than they were when you started practicing? And to the extent that the answer is not necessarily, are you optimistic about the future?
There is, in some respects, more safety that gets built in. That's a good thing. On the other hand, there's just more complexity. And with more complexity can come misunderstanding, mistakes, distraction, fatigue, and I think all of that becomes recipes for more accidents.
Well, David, I think we've done a pretty good job at just scratching the surface of this truly fascinating field, and one that really does intersect with so many of our lives. And I look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of the leading question.